people said, "Isn't life boring in the Sahara Desert?" And I would have to say it never was boring. There was always something new, and there was always something exciting. But one of the interesting things about it is that if you look at the desert from kind of above and you look down and say, gosh, there's nothing down there, and there really wasn't. From a bird's eye point of view, when you're walking around in the desert, there were all kinds of things. But one of the things that was interesting is wildlife. Just a variety of different creatures, different kinds of plants, and so on. Even though I wasn't really into all that at that time, I do have fond recollections of a number of things. One of them was when we moved a truck a rather long distance, and we didn't make it to our final destination in time, so we just slept in the truck. And it's kind of interesting. We made a fire away from the truck, and we were sitting there in the cool of the evening, the fire blazing away, and nearby was a mound of sand. And it was a mound because of the root structure of some sort of plant, kind of a bush. We called it the Libyan National Forest. And the bush just looked like an odd bush, and we didn't think much about it. But as the dusk came on and the sun went down, the fire must have attracted something, because we saw hundreds of little eyes, and they were all associated with that bush in some way. And it turned out those eyes were the eyes of small desert foxes, fennec fox, I presume. We sat there looking at those eyes, and I was wondering, do foxes eat humans? And obviously no. But it was just delightful to see them coming out of wherever they were to watch us by our fire. But there are other things to see out there. One of them was, I saw this a couple times early in the morning, just as the sun came up, the jerboa. It looks like a rodent of some sort with a really long tail. And the jerboa like to eat vegetation on any plant life. Well, there were some plants that somebody had planted around one of the skids that where our cabin was. And on this particular morning, I remember opening the door and stepping out, and here was this jerboa with this extremely long tail, and he was propelling himself up in the air so he could snatch with his mouth some of the tender leaves on his plant. But the amazing thing was, it looked like his tail was holding him up in the air, and it was a considerable distance relative to the size of the jerboa. So we saw them a couple of times. They were really cute. Of course, they ran away when you stepped outside. Other things that were kind of interesting were scorpions. I actually never saw one, but others reported scorpions around the drilling camps. Some had spoken of leaving their boots outside at night when they went to sleep, only to find a scorpion in their boot the next day. So those little guys were around. There were other things too. One of the interesting ones was kind of unexpected, and that would be a herd of ranging camels just kind of meandering around the desert. I know that camels go through a season when they don't molt, but they lose hair, and these camels were really unattractive in that state. But here was this group of camels just meandering around in the desert, looking and foraging for something to eat. Now, believe it or not, even though you didn't find a lot of vegetation out there, there was vegetation. And of course, the camels knew where it was, and they went for it. But it was really kind of fun to see them. They were really scroungy-looking things. But I had a feeling that they were probably owned by somebody. Who? I have no idea. But anyway, camels, there were, during certain seasons of the year when the European birds migrated down to Central Africa, they came right over Libya. And at times you'd see unbelievable groups of birds flying about, different kinds of birds. And I'll tell a story later about an eagle, actually, that came over a drilling camp. So there was all that. There was one place in the desert. It was kind of a stop-off point. It was a landmark because it was just one tree. Just one tree. It was big compared to most trees. There was no sapling. There must have been water, abundant supply of water underneath the sand where that tree grew. There were no other trees. There wasn't any grass. It was just a tree. And it was actually kind of a pleasant respite if you saw the tree, to go over there and sit under the shade of that tree in the heat of the day. But other than that, there wasn't a whole lot out there, except for one thing that I do remember. Totally inexplicable. We were on a drilling site, been working all night, and it was in the spring of the year. There was a bit of humidity, and as the sun came up over the top of the dunes, just a little bit, just inched its way up, all of a sudden the face of the dunes that were facing the sun had turned an obvious green color. And the green color lasted until the sun kind of rose above the dunes, until it was bright, and then the green color went away. So when I first saw it, there was another guy with me. When we first saw that, the thought was, well, it's a hue of color that came from the lighting. It doesn't mean anything. But I shared that with a geologist that I knew, and he said he couldn't explain it, but he had heard that under certain conditions of humidity and the presence of sunlight, there would be millions of spores out there in the desert of not microscopic plants, but very small plants that would suddenly bloom under the right conditions and then would disappear quickly when the sunlight became too intense. So that was some sort of plant life. I never got an answer as to exactly what that was. But what's the whole point? You can be in a place that doesn't look like there's anything of interest. And yet, here in the Sahara Desert were all kinds of things, including weaponry from World War II, skeletons of people and animals, equipment that had been left out there from this or that, and beautifully covered with sand. All the junk out there that might have been left was covered with sand. But then when the winds came and the sand dunes began to move again, then they would be uncovered. So there were a lot of discoveries. Great place to be. Loved it.